After falling out of the rotation late in the season, Gonzaga guard Dusty Stromer has entered the transfer portal. What does it mean for the Zags?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by the 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. While the transfer portal is open, we're going to have plenty of conversation over the next few weeks, months, potentially, about players the Zags could target, making a list already as we are in off-season mode here on Locked On Zags. But today we're focusing on a player who is out the door in Gonzaga guard Dusty Stromer. Stromer announced on the day of the transfer portal opening on Monday the 24th that he is entering the transfer portal. Not a huge surprise. We're going to talk about what happened this year. We're going to talk about what this means for Gonzaga in terms of next year's roster, who steps up, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to close out the show talking about what it means for Dusty, what might be next for him, some speculation on kind of where he might end up. And of course, we'll keep tabs on that and have an update whenever he does decide to find a new place to play basketball next season. We'll start with the statement that Dusty released on his social media accounts after announcing that he was entering the transfer portal. I'll just read it here. He says, quote, "First, I want to express my sincere gratitude to my family, Gonzaga University, and the incredible fans who have supported me throughout my 2 years in Spokane. After much thought and consideration, I've decided to enter the transfer portal to explore new opportunities for my academic and athletic future. I'm especially thankful to Coach Few, the entire coaching and support staff, and my teammates, and everyone who has been part of my journey. That said, I'm excited about the next chapter of my story, and I look forward to what's next." Fairly standard statement here about entering the transfer portal. Not that that's bad or anything, just kind of what you expect to see when players make this decision. And again, kind of not too hard to see that this was a possibility with how the end of the season in particular went for Dusty Stromer, a kid who was a 2-year player at Gonzaga who played more as a freshman than he did as a sophomore. That's usually a sign that somebody's going to make the decision to move on. And in Dusty's case, there was a pretty clear break in terms of when this happened, and that was the emergence of Emmanuel Innocenti initially into the starting lineup for Gonzaga, where he started, I think, 3 games, kind of as a jolt to the Gonzaga lineup after the team had those losses to Oregon State on the road and then Santa Clara at home. Mark Few made the change, brings Emmanuel Innocenti into the starting lineup in place of Caleb Battle, and in that particular game, that was a game against Portland at the Chiles Center. Dusty actually played a fair amount in that game. He played a decent amount in the next game, which was a home game against Oregon State, where Innocenti still started. And then after that, Gonzaga reverted back to their starting lineup with Caleb Battle, but Innocenti just very clearly replaced Stromer as that wing coming off the bench. And Innocenti played great, and Dusty kind of didn't. And he was struggling before this, and when kind of put into it, and understandably, when you have a big role, you were a starter for 15 games last year. You were a sixth man playing good minutes this year. And then you get relegated to a much deeper bench role. He just kind of never had a lot of strong performances from that point forward. And for Stromer, Innocenti is not going anywhere. He's going to be here next year, almost certainly. And so the odds of Dusty I think the expectation that we had, and I would assume the expectation that Dusty had, was that you play a good amount of minutes as a freshman, you play a similar amount of minutes as a sophomore, but then you step into a starting role as a junior, and that was the plan. I mean, I'm pretty confident in saying that was the plan for Dusty, and now Innocenti looks like he's going to take that role. And then you add on to the fact that Gonzaga added Jalen Warley, the transfer from Virginia, who played 3 years at Florida State, who's a 6'7" wing, whose primary impact is defensively. Like that is a spot that's kind of being replaced. The Dusty's being replaced there as well. You have Innocenti and Warley, both defensive focused wings around the same size as Dusty. And you potentially have Steele Venters coming back as well. We don't know the status on Steele Venters as of right now, but Steele Venters also a 6'7" wing and a 3-point shooter. Dusty Stromer's 2 best strengths are 3-point shooting, catch and shoot 3-point shooting specifically, and defense. And when you have Warley, Innocenti, and potentially Venters on the roster, the path to playing time for Dusty was pretty murky going into his junior year. And so it made sense that he was like, well, I want to see if I can find another place. And we'll look just briefly at his minutes per game. And it's very obvious to see what happened here. Last year as a freshman, Stromer played 35 games. He made 15 starts. Started at the beginning of the year in place of Steele Venters and then was replaced in the starting lineup by Ben Gregg, and actually played better in the second half of the year after being replaced in that starting lineup. He played about 23 and a half minutes per game. This year, he played 34 games, missed one game with an illness. He made one start this year. It was a UCLA game, played 30 minutes in that game. And then he only averaged 17 and a half minutes per game. And again, the break is obvious. First 22 games of the season for Dusty, he averaged 22.4 minutes per game. So basically, right within the same minutes per game that he averaged as a freshman. In those 22 and a half minutes per game, he was averaging 5.8 points, 3 boards. He was shooting 35.5% from three. Those were career numbers, better than he did last year as a freshman. He scored in 20 of Gonzaga's first 22 games. He had 2 games where he didn't score. Interestingly, that UCLA game where he started was actually one of the games he didn't score. But then in the final 12 games of the season, this was right around the time when Innocenti stepped into that bigger role. Dusty averaged 8.6 minutes per game, about a third as many minutes as he was playing prior to that. 8.6 minutes per game. He averaged just 1.5 points, half a rebound, shot 28.5% from three. So the shooting plummeted, the scoring plummeted, the minutes per game plummeted. He only played more than 10 minutes in 3 of his final 12 games. So he played, I forgot to mention this, in 21 of his first 22 games this season, Dusty played 15 or more minutes per game. There's only one game in the first 22 games of the season where Dusty didn't play 15 minutes. And yet, in the final 12 games of the season, he only played over 10 minutes 3 times. Again, very obvious split in terms of when he was replaced in the rotation for Mark Few and the Zags. He was also scoreless in 8 of his final 12 games. After scoring in 20 of his first 22 games, he scored in just 4 of his final 12 games. He had just 2 points total in 5 March games, and they came in the first March game of the season against Santa Clara. And then he did not score against San Francisco. He did not score in the WCC tournament. He did not score in the NCAA tournament, and he barely played in those games. For a career, Dusty Stromer played 69 games at Gonzaga. He made 16 starts, again, 15 of them as a freshman, 1 of them this past year as a sophomore. He played about 20 and a half minutes per game as a total, averaged 4.6 points, basically. He was very similar, actually, his freshman year and his sophomore year in points per game and most stats. So he finishes his Gonzaga career 4.6 points, 2.6 boards, 0.9 assists, 0.6 steals per game. He shot 45.1% on 2-pointers, 35.1% from 3 on about 2.5 attempts per game. Was at times looking like a very, very solid catch-and-shoot 3-point specialist, but was never consistent enough to really be reliable in that role the way that Gonzaga needed him to be. He was a career 80.3% free throw shooter as well. He had a career high 15 points in his 7th career game. This was a game I was at in Las Vegas at the Garden Grand Arena against USC. Bronny James's team with Isaiah Collier and all those talented players that Gonzaga just stomped all over them. They jumped out to a huge lead and just maintained a 10, 12-point lead all game. Dusty called Gonzaga the Kings of LA after that game. I remember that was a high point for him early in his Gonzaga career. He, all told, finished his career with 10 games, scoring in double figures out of his 69 career games. And now what I want to do is talk about what this means for Gonzaga. What does it mean for the roster next season? We gave a little bit of a kind of talk on that already, but we'll get a little bit more into the details on that. And then we'll close out the show talking about what it means for Dusty Stromer specifically. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. And this week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Cal's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the NCAA tournament, but knock off back-to-back national champion on Hall of Fame coaches en route to the Sweet 16. They accomplished all of this without their second leading scorer, Boogie Flan, for most of SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounder Adu Thiero so far in the NCAA tournament. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada Rogue or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop Nissan USA, Today's episode is also brought to you by Varsity Icons. Folks, get ready to bring your favorite Zags to life. VarsityIcons.com delivers the ultimate collection of action figures that honors both current and former Zags. Varsity Icons is the premier sports collectible figure for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. Today, we highlight everyone's fan favorite, Ben Gregg. Varsity Icons was started by a longtime Gonzaga Bulldogs fan who wanted to create collectible figures of everyone's all-time favorite Zags. The mission of Varsity Icons is to create figures of current and former Zags for everyone to collect and enjoy. There's no question that Varsity Icons wanted to highlight now kind of a current and former Zag in Ben Gregg to be their first player. He has been a fan favorite since joining the Zags way back in 2021. Ben exemplifies what it means to be a Gonzaga Bulldog every time he steps on the court. We're excited to create more of your favorite Zags in the future, so stay tuned and order your favorite Varsity Icons Ben Gregg figure today at varsityicons.com. Varsity Icons, where icons live forever. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking about the departure of Gonzaga rising junior guard Dusty Stromer after spending 2 years in Spokane, former top 50 prospect in the recruiting class. We're going to talk about what this means for Gonzaga. And again, we already kind of touched on some of this in the first segment, so we'll try not to rehash it too much, but Dusty had already fallen out of the rotation for this most recent season that just finished up and had likely put himself in a position where he wasn't going to be, I don't want to say he wasn't going to be in the rotation for next year, but there was a very real chance he wasn't going to be in the rotation next year. It's not a guarantee, but previously it seemed like a near lock that Dusty would not only be, of course, in the rotation as a junior, but I think the expectation was that he would be a starter and that he would be a high-level player. And we talk so much about Gonzaga's development and Gonzaga's track record of success here. And I don't necessarily want to say that they missed on Dusty, because I think that's a little bit too reductive and not necessarily true. But the plan, in my estimation, is that Dusty was expected to be a guy who played, he played a lot as a freshman, more than he was expected to. The plan for Dusty Stromer never even started where I think it was expected to start. And some of that is just because of a lot of that's the injury to Steele Venters, and it never really materialized the way it was supposed to. I expect, and I doubt we'll ever get a clear answer on this, but I expect Dusty was expected to be a rotation player as a freshman. They kind of needed him to be. Even before Steele Venters got hurt, I think he would have needed to be a rotation piece. But the expectation was he was off the bench as a freshman, playing 15, 20 minutes per game. And then as a sophomore, he steps into a bigger role. Maybe it's still off the bench, but it's a more consistent role. Who knows exactly what they thought there. But I think the plan was that by his junior year, he's starting. He's your starting three. He's your best on-ball defender. He's a great three-point shooter, and that more of his offensive bag developed where he could, put the ball on the deck, get to the rim. He's not as big or as strong as like a Corey Kispert type, and I don't know if the expectation was that maybe he would get there or not, but like somebody who could play the three, who could be a knockdown shooter, be a double-digit, point per game scorer, but who could also get to the rim and do some other stuff offensively. And then the plan immediately got scrapped 2 days before the start of his freshman season when Steele Venters gets hurt, and they thrust him into the starting lineup, and he has some good moments, like we said, the 15 points against USC, and then struggles a little bit kind of in the middle of his freshman year to the point where they replaced him in the starting lineup with Ben Gregg. That worked better. It worked better for Dusty too. His shooting got better. His overall role and comfort in Gonzaga's system got better. And then he comes into this year, and of course, Gonzaga goes out and gets Caleb Battle, which was a huge addition for them. They don't lose anybody. And then Steele Venters gets hurt again, unfortunately. And so for Dusty, it was like, well, he's going to have a similar role. And again, through the first 22 games of the season, he did have a similar role. He played almost exactly the same minutes per game. He was scoring more. He still didn't have much of an offensive game outside of catch and shoot, but his defense was solid. But then he gets replaced by Emmanuel Innocenti, who just outplayed him. I mean, I think it's unfortunately that simple. And part of it was because Dusty Stromer's shot completely vanished. His three-point shot was there at the beginning of the year and then just gone for most of December, gone for most of January. The whole Gonzaga team had a plague of not being able to shoot the three ball. It was far and away not just Dusty Stromer. Ben Gregg shot like 20% in the first 2 months of the season. Michael Ajayi's shot never materialized. Braden Huff was about 15 percentage points lower than he was the previous year. Like the three-point shooting was just gone for this entire team. And what Mark Few and the staff kind of realized is, hey, Emmanuel Innocenti is a better defender than Dusty Stromer. Not even that Dusty's particularly bad in that area, but Emmanuel Innocenti is very, very good on-ball defender. He's tenacious, he's physical, and he just was more impactful on that end of the floor. And then I think the kicker was that, and I think why the staff was hesitant to play Innocenti outside of the, potential problems it could cause internally. And, I think probably a fear of like, hey, if we replace Stromer in the rotation, he's probably going to leave. And they correctly guessed on that. I think a fair and reasonable guess. But at the end of the day, they figured if Dusty's not hitting his shots, sure, Innocenti's not a great shooter, but if Dusty's not making them, we'd rather play the better defensive player. And I think another part of this conversation, outside of the Jalen Warley of it all, which we'll get to in a second, but Innocenti is not an offensive player in the sense that he's not a scorer. He's not getting to the rim. Offensively, he's more of a catch and shoot guy than anything else, but he's what the coaching staff and what Ryan Nembhard talked about as a ball mover. You can have him in the offense. They run the motion offense. They can pass him the ball. He passes it back, but he's not turning it over. He's not making bad decisions with the basketball. He's just somebody that you can rely on to keep the offense going. Dusty honestly wasn't great at that. Dusty had a lot of turnovers. And I know this was kind of drew the ire of the fan base. If you're on social media, you saw a lot of people would talk about this, would complain about this, where Dusty would have kind of soft passes or would get a little robotic where he would just swing the ball around without really paying attention. And the amount of times where Dusty turned the ball over on either lazy or telegraphed passes it happened a lot. You could see the frustration on Mark Few's face, the amount of times that Dusty got pulled from games when that happened. And I think when you kind of took a bigger picture look, you're like, well, okay, Innocenti is a better on-ball defender. And Dusty maybe knows the defense better. He understands the scheme a little bit better, but Innocenti is contributing more with his ability to navigate screens. Offensively, Dusty's a better three-point shooter in a vacuum, but he wasn't shooting better than Innocenti. Neither of them were shooting a lot, so the difference between, Strowmer being slightly better was just not making a big difference on a game-to-game basis and not as impactful as what Innocenti was adding to the team defensively. And then when you factor in the fact that Innocenti wasn't turning the ball over offensively the way that Dusty Stromer was, it kind of made it clear that that was the move that needed to be made. And you always hope when that happens that it works for both players. And frankly, Gonzaga had reason to guess that this might work because it was the second year in a row that Dusty Stromer's role shrank in the middle of the season. Not fun. Nobody wants that to happen, but Dusty responded to that extremely well as a freshman. He responded to that very well. And obviously there's significant differences between going from a starter to a key reserve and also between going from a reserve or a rotation reserve to barely in the rotation at all, which is what happened this last year. And also I think Dusty was never expected to be a starter. So reverting back to a role that he was expected to fill is a little bit different than this year where he reverted to a role that was below what his expectation was. That's a pretty big difference. And in fact, Dusty was speaking to Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review at the end of the season and kind of, I'll paraphrase his quote, but he basically said, it was hard. Like I was trying to keep my head up for the team, but it was hard. And he didn't say anything that I thought was particularly inflammatory or negative, but I think he just said that mentally it was challenging for him. I think that's what the quote kind of implied, which sure, why wouldn't it be? And I don't think it's like I was struggling or frustrated because I was mad about my playing time. I'm sure he wasn't happy about it, but I'm guessing from what I know about him and his family and his upbringing and everything, I think he was probably frustrated with himself. I think that was the hard part was I don't feel like I'm able to help the team the way that I want to. And it was hard on him. And that sucks. That's the humanness of this industry, of this, world. It's like we talk about every year there's players shuffling in and out of the transfer portal and the good and the bad of it. But like they're human. They're not even human. They're kids. They're kids. And Dusty, I think wanted to do better this year than he did. And sure, I'm sure that some of that frustration is directed at why didn't I get a chance to play more? But he did get those chances and was not able to capitalize them in the way that I think he and the staff wanted him to. And that led to him losing playing time. It's just one of those things that happens. And again, I don't think the Gonzaga coaching staff misses on guys all that often. I wouldn't even say that they missed here as much as it just, they found somebody else who filled the role a little bit better in that moment than he did, and now he's going to go look for another opportunity. And I think, again, the Jalen Warley of it all is a factor here. Warley is a similar player to Dusty and has more experience and is probably going to be a starter next year. I think the expectation is that Jalen Warley will start. I think that means Innocenti will probably come off the bench because I think Gonzaga is going to add another guard. I think Braden Smith starts at the 1. I think you have an empty spot at the 2 guard right now where Gonzaga is looking in the transfer portal to find somebody. I think Warley plays the 3, and then I think Huff and Ike play the 4 and the 5 if they both stay. If Graham Ike leaves, then Huff plays the 5, and then you find a 4 in the transfer portal, potentially Michael Ajayi if he comes back. That's all. We'll talk about the front court later in a different show, but I think that's kind of the plan in the backcourt right now. And yeah, that leaves. And then again, then there's the Steele Venters of it all. If Steele Venters is back, if he's healthy, if he's 100%, that's a big if. It's a big if. But you could have a Smith, Venters, Warley with Innocenti off the bench. That doesn't leave much room for Dusty Stromer. And the Zags need a backup point guard. They're going to get a backup point guard in the transfer portal. So if they get a backup point guard, you have Smith, backup point guard, Venters, Warley, Innocenti. There's no room for Dusty Stromer. There's just no room. So he saw the writing on the wall, and he made the decision to move on. And I think now Gonzaga is in a position where they're going to look for a backup point guard, and I think they're also going to look for a starting 2 guard, depending on the Steele Venters of it all. That's a big hinge for Gonzaga right now, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Gonzaga go out and try to get a high-level scorer at the 2, like a potential leading scorer type player, and have your lineup be Smith, transfer, Warley, Venters, Innocenti, somewhere in that mix. Fogel, obviously, probably not playing big minutes as a true freshman as well. So the Zags still have plenty of depth there. They're not in a concerning position for this program, but obviously it's no fun to see a player that Gonzaga recruited highly, that Gonzaga thought highly of, that Gonzaga developed, not stick with the program. But it is part of the nature of college basketball in this era, and unfortunate for Dusty. But now, hopefully, this works out well for him. Hopefully this is a situation where Dusty finds a place that has more opportunity for him. Maybe a change of scenery helps him. I always want to see our players succeed when they move on to other places. And I think there's a very real possibility of that happening. Dusty was a top 50 prospect. We're going to talk kind of to close out the show what that future might look like for Dusty Stromer coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources on the latest product information to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And if you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, so now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking about the departure of Gonzaga guard Dusty Stromer after 2 seasons in Spokane, a former top 50 prospect in the 2023 recruiting class. Gonzaga hasn't been landing a lot of top 50 prospects lately. It's been a source of contention, of fear, angst among the fan base at times when they miss on guys like Zoom Diallo and Asa Newell. And this most recent offseason, they miss on guys like Kingston Flemings from Houston, Isaiah Harwell. They missed on him, Nick Kaminia, who's committing to Duke. But Stromer was one of the last kind of high-profile freshmen. And I think part of the reason I'm not super concerned about the rankings, like not landing players based on how a website in 247 Sports ranks them, is like Braden Huff was like 75 spots lower than Dusty Stromer in his recruiting class. Much better player, much bigger contributor for Gonzaga. So those rankings don't mean that much to me, but the fact of the matter is they do matter to people. And in this case, it works in Dusty Stromer's favor in the sense that he will be viewed as a high-profile, hot commodity in the transfer portal. There are thousands of players in the transfer portal, thousands of guys out there. But Dusty was somebody that a lot of high-profile programs pursued when he ended up going to Gonzaga. So those programs, those coaches who were recruiting him, who were targeting him, they studied him. They saw what they liked. They saw what they didn't like. They had a plan for him. We think you can be this. We think you can be that. We think you can bring us this. And while his performance at Gonzaga wasn't up to the standard of what Gonzaga necessarily wanted from him, and that was why his playing time dropped in the second half of his both seasons, but really in the second half of his sophomore season, that doesn't mean that he won't still be pursued by prominent programs. Again, he was a really good high school basketball player at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, California. He went up against Bronny James a bunch. He had teammates, Mercy Miller, who's at Houston, like other teammates who are playing. I think he had teammates who went to Duke. Like, he played with really good high school players. He played at a really good high school. He played big minutes with one of the best players on that team. Like, he has pedigree that should absolutely help him. And again, while the numbers at Gonzaga maybe aren't elite, they're not bad. A player who averages 5 points per game in a 20-minute per game role at Gonzaga is going to get pursued fairly heavily in the transfer portal, even without the pedigree. When you factor in the pedigree, you factor in that he was recruited by USC and UCLA and insert many West Coast high major programs, that plus the fact that he was productive. You start 16 games at Gonzaga across 2 years, that is immediate. Like, that stat alone is going to perk the ears up of all these assistant coaches and general managers who are out there, scouring the transfer portal. He's a 6'6" wing who can shoot the three ball capably, who's a good defender, who started 16 games at Gonzaga. Those facts alone will start getting your agent phone calls alone, period. And then obviously you look into some of the other stuff, and there's going to be some things that people are like, oh, maybe not, maybe that. And obviously you got to start putting a dollar value on these players and determining, okay, how much do we think Dusty's worth? How much do we want to pay him? But again, this isn't a player who's going to just kind of vanish into the ether, who's not going to be able to get a good offer from somebody else. I am very curious, though, what kind of route Dusty takes, because I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing that Dusty will have opportunities to go to power conference programs. And I think he will also have opportunities to go play really big minutes at mid-major programs. And he'll have to make a decision. His situation is kind of a sort of a mix in some ways between Hunter Salas and Dominic Harris. Hunter Salas, of course, goes to Wake Forest, is an all ACC player, is a potential NBA draft pick, probably should have gone to the NBA draft after last year when he shot 40% from three and averaged 18 points a game. He came back to Wake Forest to try to lead the team to the NCAA tournament, was unable to do so, put up big numbers, but his three-point shooting tanked, and now he's a year older in a more a deeper NBA draft class, and his three-point shooting tanked, which now means 3 of his 4 years in college he didn't shoot the three ball well. So that is an aside. Dusty could maybe go a route like that. I would, without trying to be disrespectful, I'd be surprised if Dusty Stromer were able to transfer to a power conference school and score 18 points a game. I also didn't think Hunter Salas would do that. And I was wrong. He did do that. Maybe Dusty can do that in a different situation. Salas wanted to transfer because he wanted to be on ball. He wanted to play point guard. He wanted to have the ball in his hands. I don't get the sense that that's a role Dusty is clamoring for or necessarily capable of filling. I think Dusty is a catch and shoot 3-and-D wing. I think that's who he is. I think that's who he fancies himself as being. And I think he can fill that role for a good team. Again, if you wanted to go back home, and I think that's always a factor, we always kind of assume that players want to return closer to home. That's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true. And so I don't want to, pigeonhole Dusty by saying, well, he's going to go to UCLA or USC, or he's going to go to LMU or Pepperdine or somewhere like that because he wants to go closer to his home. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Maybe homesickness is a factor. Maybe the weather is a factor. Like, I don't know. He hasn't come out and said any of that. I haven't heard any of that from any rumblings. But like, if you wanted to go to a school like USC or UCLA, I think he could fill a role as a 3-and-D wing. Maybe in the starting lineup. USC, almost their entire team was basically seniors, so they'll have a lot of space available. Eric Musselman loves the transfer portal more than any coach in college basketball, so he's going to be eyeing it pretty big. But he could also go to like a UC Irvine, a team that should have made the NCAA tournament this year, or a UC San Diego, or a UC Santa Barbara, who has a big NIL package. They have a huge amount of money in the Big West. He could go there and start and probably play 30, 32 minutes a game, maybe average 12, 15 points. And you get NBA attention from the Big West, like you do. Players have come out of that league, not regularly, but it happens. So I think that he's kind of got these different paths. It depends what he wants. Does he want playing time? Does he want money? Does he want prestige? Does he want NBA attention, development, like, I mean, obviously you kind of want some combination of all those things, but what are his priorities? What are his needs? Is the homesickness a huge part of it? Is it not a factor at all? Does he want to get the heck away from the West Coast? Does he want to go all the way out to the East Coast? Like, people thought, oh, Aiden Mahaney's probably going to stay local because he's from the Moraga area. He went about as far away as you freaking can when he goes to Storrs, Connecticut to play for UConn. So we don't know that that's necessarily the case for Dusty, but I'm really interested to see what happens to Dusty, because if you told me he transferred to a high team in the Big Ten like USC, UCLA, or a team in the Big East, or another high major top 25 caliber program, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know that I'd expect that he's playing 30 minutes a night there, but I wouldn't be stunned. But if you told me he went to, another WCC school or a Big West school, or, the A10, he goes to like Dayton or St. Louis or somewhere like that, I also wouldn't be surprised. Like, I think that would make some sense for Dusty as well, just in terms of getting a chance to play more minutes and boost his draft stock by just having the ball in your hands. You can't boost your draft stock if you're on the bench. So I think that there are some things that Dusty has to decide here and make a decision on, and get these pitches from fellow coaches, and obviously the NIL and things like that are going to play a role as well. But this is going to be a really interesting one. And I'm rooting really hard for Dusty. I really want to see him succeed. He seems like a fantastic kid. I feel for him that, again, from the first day of the season, his freshman year, his role was not what it was expected to be. That's really hard. That's really, really hard. And you can tell it took a toll on him in a way that I think hampered his ability to be the player that he's capable of being in Spokane. Hopefully he can find that player somewhere else starting next season. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to the everydayers as well. We'll be back with more transfer portal talk. We'll talk about players Gonzaga's contacted, players we think Gonzaga should contact. We'll continue our season review series. This was our season review episode for Dusty Stromer. So we're going to have a lot more of these, talking about every player on the roster as well. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on in the transfer portal and the NCAA tournament, all coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Thanks again for listening, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And as always, go Zags.